Welcome back to Seed Time and Harvest. Today we're going to talk about pressure canning. Now you already saw how we did water bath canning using a water bath canner to preserve your high acid foods such as your fruits and your tomato sauce. Today we're going to talk about preserving your fresh produce such as potatoes using a pressure canner. So stay tuned, we'll be demonstrating pressure canning. Now, you may not want to go ahead and use the regular pressure cooker found in your home that you use for, on a day-to-day basis for cooking. You want to get a proper pressure canner that has the weight and the pressure gauge. The pressure gauge is very important because as you follow your recipes, you're going to see that you need a particular pound of pressure within your cooker to make sure that all the bacteria that will cause the food to spoil is destroyed. Now you can get this pressure canner, at either Amazon, Walmart, Bed Bath & Beyond, whatever fits your budget. Shop around. One thing that you want to make sure is that your pressure canner comes with some form of a barrier between your pot and your jars. As you can see on my stove, we have our pressure canner. I add some water in it. Basically, you want about 4 inches of water to begin with above your base, which is your rack. Now, you don't really have to, just like we did with the water bath canner, that you have to have at least 1 inch of water above your jars. When you're pressure canning, you don't necessarily have to do that, but your recipe will tell you how much water to put in your pressure canner, right? Another thing, we have hot water here. Just warming up. We have our jars in our oven. We have our lids already preheating in some little warm water. We're going to be processing potatoes. On Sabbath, we got a lot of carrots, and it was more than I was able to use in even 2 weeks. And so we decided to pressure can them. And here we have our carrots. Really nice. And we're going to do the same thing with our potatoes. We're going to wash them, peel them, get everything prepped, and we'll bring you in to show you what we're going to be doing next. For your potatoes, majority of the nutrients is located close to the skin. In the middle, you have mostly starch. And with that in mind, I'm just going to wash my potatoes really good, and then I'm going to cut them up. So I'm not going to be peeling my potatoes. You may notice I have potatoes in 2 sections on my board. I have the smaller size and I have bigger size. You can do the smaller size if you want to make hash browns or anything like that, and the bigger size if you want to make soups or mashed potatoes or anything like that. So it's really up to you. I'm just going to put them in separate jars and label them differently so I can use them, for whatever recipe I'm going to need in the future. So we cut up our potatoes, we wash them before we cut them, and we cut them and we're going to wash them again. We're using the Russet potatoes, and that's perhaps one of the most starchy potatoes, so we want to get that extra starch off. So stay tuned, and then we're going to pack them in the jar. Our water bath canner is warming. The water is warm. It's not at a rolling boil. We don't want our water bath canner to be at a rolling boil as yet. But for now, we got our warm jar out of the oven. You can either do the hot pack or cold pack. A hot pack is when you cook your potatoes and then you put the cooked potatoes in the jar. But a cold pack is what we're gonna do is, we just prep our potatoes, we cut them up, and we're gonna put the cold potatoes in the jar. And then what we're gonna do is we're going to put hot water onto the potatoes. All right, and again, we have a pot of water already preheating. If you have a kettle handy, you just want to keep your kettle so you have enough. We use about 10 pounds of potatoes, and that 10 pounds of potatoes should give us 8 jars. And just remember, you want to leave your 1-inch headspace. You also need to get rid of the bubbles in your jar. So I'm just going to use a skewer stick, whatever you have handy, to get the bubbles out of the jar. Additionally, if you're doing a pint jar, which is this one, you're going to need to add 1, or rather half a teaspoon of salt. But since we're doing the quart jar, we're going to add 1 teaspoon of salt. Again, for pressure canning, salt is really optional. However, it helps with the preservation. And once this is preserved later, in 6 months or so, you can just take this jar, unpack its contents and just mash it up, and it makes a really nice mashed potatoes. Next thing I'm going to do is get my lid and put my lid on. But before I do that, you want to make sure you clean the rim of the jar. And you want to make sure that your head space is 1 inch, right? And that allows the contents in the jar to expand. Clean the lid, clean the rim of the jar. My husband would say, so that you have a good seal, right? Then you make your jars finger tight, because later on you're going to remove the bands, so you don't want to make it too tight so that you can't remove it. And then you're going to just put the jar in your canner, and you just repeat that step until all your jars are complete. All right, this is our last jar. I do want to say we had a few potatoes left over. Usually that's not the case, but I think because we cut them, most of them a little bit bigger, they were not all able to fill in the jar. Nonetheless, we did get 8 jars. One thing I want to mention, before you cover your pot, you want to make sure that your cooker comes to a rolling boil, a steady boil. That's going to take about 5 to 10 minutes. Once it comes to a steady boil, you're going to put your cover on without the weight. Okay, once your cooker is at a rolling boil, you're going to cover your pressure cooker without the weight. Now, after you see a steady flow of steam, then you're going to add the weight to the cooker. All right, and we will bring you back at that time. Our pressure canner is at a rolling boil right now, so we're going to put the lid on. All right, this can be a little bit tricky. Hey, I got it. All right, once the lid is on, we're just going to close our cooker, again leaving the weight off. We need to have a steady flow of steam coming out of our pressure pot. That's going to be an additional 10 minutes. Once that happens, I'm going to put the weight on, and then I'm going to show you how to maintain that 10-pound pressure in your cooker. Our stove is at the highest temperature, and the pressure canner was letting out a steady flow of steam, so we added the weight, and you can see that our pressure gauge is going up. It's almost at 5. Once the pressure gauge shows 10, we're going to reduce the temperature of the stove to either low, or for my stove, I'll put it at a 3. Once it hit a 3, I can maintain that 10-pound pressure. Whatever temperature on your stove, so whatever temperature you need to reduce it by so that you can maintain that 10-pound pressure, go ahead and do so. As soon as my pressure gauge hits 10 pounds, I'm going to start my timer for 40 minutes because I'm using a quart jar. The quart jar requires a processing time for 40 minutes. If you're using a pint jar, then it's 35 minutes at 10 pounds of pressure. So I'll just keep you posted as the time goes and the pressure maintains at 10. Once your timer expires, all you need to do is just turn the stove off. Do not remove the pressure cooker from the stove. Do not open the vent pipe to let the steam out. No, you need to let the pressure canner depressurize on its own until that weight goes down to 0. Once your weight goes down to 0, then I'll tell you what to do next. And again, that should take anywhere from 20 to maybe 30 minutes. I'm using a glass top stove, so it takes a while for my stove to cool down. So for my pressure canner to go down to 0 may take 40 minutes. Again, that depends on your stove, but you do not want to do anything until your gauge is on 0. Canner depressurized on its own. You want to go ahead and remove your vent pipe and open your canner still. You don't want to take your jars out. After you open your canner, leave it for about an additional 10 minutes for everything to cool down evenly, and then take your jars out. We allowed our canner to completely cool. Once the gauge did go back to 0, we allow it to sit for another 10 minutes to completely depressurize. We open the lid, allow it to sit for an additional 10 minutes so that the jars within the canner can cool before you take them out. Because what will happen is if you take the hot jars directly out of the canner and put them in a cold room, the extreme change in temperature may cause them to break. Now you may be wondering why I have this here. Well, our 20 quart, I was hoping it would fit 8, but it did fit 7. However, in the process we did lose 1. And I know what happens. There, maybe 10 reasons why you may lose a jar completely packed with good food. But what had happened is, because I couldn't fit my 8, I tried to stuff this jar with potatoes, and it's, in the process it had to expand under the pressure. And because there was not enough space, as you can see here, the potatoes, everything, the contents were trying to expand, and because it couldn't, I got a jar breaking. But that's all right. We learn from our mistakes and then we correct them. Nonetheless, we did get 6 jars completely sealed. Once you allow it to cool, if you press the top of the lid, it should not concave. If it does, then that means your seal was not properly formed. When you do take your jars out of the canner, you want to make sure that you don't shake them. If the lid came unloose during the process, don't try to retighten the lid, because that will affect the seal formation. However, once your seal is completely formed, you can remove your bands or you can leave them on for storage. You just want to make sure that you clean all the food that got siphoned on, if if it was open in any case, or in our case, because the jar broke, we had some food on the jars. So you just want to go ahead and clean those up and date them. All right, you want to just date your jars. You can say what's in it if it's similar product with slightly different ingredients, and store your jars in a dark place. Not temperature not too lower than 50 degrees, the best as possible, not too higher than 80 degrees. Just store them in a cool place, and again, you have up to 18 months to enjoy the products in your jar. So we had to put this food under pressure to destroy the bacteria that will cause our food to spoil. Similarly, we go through trials. God allows us to go through trials to destroy the defects in our character so that we can be precious like potatoes. And that's what I wanted to share with you. One more thing, remember not to leave your rack in the water bath or in the canner, because they will rust, and you don't want that. So as soon as you're done with the process, even though the water may be hot, you may not want to handle the pressure canner at the moment, just remove your rack, dry it off, and set it aside so it doesn't rust. Now we'll be sharing with you a lot more canning videos, so stay tuned and happy jarring.